Okay, so Unit 1, Module 9. This has been added into the Security Officer and Door Supervisor training since April 2021, and it's part of their top-up training um, since what happened at the MEN Arena in 2017 and other incidents around the world. Okay, so terrorism is the use of violence, threats and intimidation, especially in the pursuit of political aims. Security operatives need to be aware of what is currently happening around the world and in their particular area, any recent terror attacks or threats, the location of their own site in relation to other possible targets nearby, and where the site itself is famous or important in its own right, the vulnerability of the site to attack and the current level of threat nationally. That can be checked out on the MI5 website. But with the middle one, the location of their own site in relation to other possible targets nearby. I ask in my classes if anyone can remember the last terror attack in the UK or one of the most recent ones, and they always come up with Manchester or London on the bridge. A lot of people forget that one of the most recent ones was the Liverpool Women's Hospital in the taxi, but people forget that because it was a failed attack. I think that's why people don't forget it. He only killed himself, didn't he? But when it's talking about other possible targets nearby in the middle there, it's believed that that terrorist was trying to go to the war memorial event, but he was running out of time. So then he diverted to the women's hospital, and that's when the taxi driver realised something isn't right here. His suspicions went through the roof then. Luckily enough, he jumped out of the car as well, and he survived, the taxi driver. Okay, but that's just to give an example of them. When they run out of time, they will normally choose another target nearby. But you can only imagine the horror of what could have happened if he had got into the women's hospital. Doesn't bear thinking about, does it? Okay, so the threat level definitions: critical, an attack is highly likely in the near future. Severe, an attack is highly likely. Substantial, an attack is likely. Moderate, an attack is possible but not likely. And then low, an attack is highly unlikely. Counter-terrorism measures will help to reduce the chance of a site becoming a target. Threats can be reduced by vigilance. Good housekeeping gets a lot of people confused because they don't understand why cleaning up would help. But if you think about it, if you're keeping your site or workplace clean, you're going to notice things that are out of the ordinary then, aren't you? Anything that might be out of place. Okay, so that's why it helps. Use of physical security measures, regular, obvious patrols, use of strict access control procedures, effective search procedures, visible use of your CCTV, the reporting of suspicions to your supervisors or managers immediately. I'd always follow that up as well with a text or an email. Don't just rely on your incident report as evidence that you've told a supervisor or manager, because supervisors and managers sometimes forget to act on any information that they've been given. And if something did occur, health and safety incidents, someone's injured or dies, or a terror incident, people are injured or die, there's a likelihood that supervisor or manager will deny that you've passed information on to them to save their own job at the cost of your job. So it's always important to always follow up with some form of evidence that you've passed intelligence on or any risk concerns, okay? Know what information emergency response require and have an awareness of the emergency response times. Once terrorists have identified a target, the potential attack will be moved to the planning phase. This phase involves gathering information on a target. So when you think about it, terrorists act like police themselves. They gather their own intelligence, don't they? They'll identify the target's vulnerabilities and identify the level of security present at the target. That's really important. Most of the time when you're working in the general public, you get people that come up to you and ask you questions that you would not normally divulge to anybody. So be careful with this. If someone comes up to you and asks you, are you working on your own all night? Do you get your head down? Do you have a little sleep? How many cameras are there? Do you watch them all night? Things like that, you're not gonna answer those type of questions, are you? Even if the person does seem totally innocent, they might well be, but they might repeat anything you've told them to someone else, and a potential terrorist or burglar has overheard hearing the conversation. So you need to be very careful what you reveal to people, and you should never tell anybody that you're working on your own. The most current terror attack methods have included marauding terror attacks. So that's like a raid attack. If you remember in Paris, in the streets where they all went running around, stabbing people with knives in the street, that's a marauding terror attack, a raid attack. Please try and remember that for your tests. Or MTA stands for a marauding terror attack. Explosive devices, including improvised explosive devices, IED, person-borne improvised explosive device, PBIED, vehicle-borne improvised device, VBIED. Vehicle as a weapon, or VAAW, comes up a lot, and I get a lot of people who colour in the wrong answer, and they don't bother looking at other possible answers. One that comes up a lot is vehicle as a weapon. Vehicle ramming. So obviously that is a vehicle being used as a weapon, isn't it? If it's ramming people or ramming anybody, it's a weapon. And it's the vehicle ramming that people overlook and just end up colouring in a totally different answer. Just because it's got vehicle in the answer, they go with it. And then they miss the vehicle ramming answer. So be mindful of that. I don't know what test paper you're going to get on your qualifications, do I? And we can't tell anybody in advance. Hazardous substances, including chemical, biological and radiological. If you remember, all the acid attacks that were going on, that could be considered a chemical attack, isn't it? And also cyber attacks are possible. Someone in a previous class asked me, how is a cyber attack a terror attack? If it's targeted at a business that's worth millions or even billions, then it is considered terrorism. If it's something minor, like minor virus attacks on your computer, then that's different. But if it's specifically targeted to somewhere where there's multi-million or billion pounds or dollars involved, then it could be considered terrorism. The role you'll be expected to take during a terror attack will be outlined in your organisation's policies and procedures. You should encourage members of the public to run to a place of safety. If you can't run, hide and call 999. Okay, in your test paper, if it might ask you about the actions you take during a terror attack, it might say, what does TELL stand for? What does TELL mean? And some people get that one wrong. All it means is call 999. You're calling the police. TELL. Okay, but there's another T that comes up in the HOT protocol that confuses people, but we'll come to that shortly. In the event of an attack, you should consider your route. Insist others go along with you. However, don't let their indecision slow you down, because you've got to think of your own safety as well, haven't you? And once you've identified a safe route, then run. Consider your route as you leave. Will it place you in the line of fire, or is it safer to wait for the attacker to move away before you continue? If you can't move to safety, then hide. When finding a hiding place, you should consider the exits and escape routes. Rooms that have reinforced walls and doors with internal locks. Moving away from the door. Switching your phone to silent and switching it off vibrate. And staying silent. We're not going to shout for help, are we, if we're hiding? That'd be a silly move, wouldn't it? If you're able to evacuate, get as far away as possible and call the police by dialing 999. Tell them clearly where you're located and where the attackers are. Give a clear description of the attackers, including details of their clothing and weapons. Give details about the number of casualties. Explain the layout of the building and include anything else you think is important. So follow your evacuation and lockdown and evacuation procedures. So evacuation or lockdown, staff members and members of the public should be moved to the most sheltered area of the venue or site, away from windows and other exposed areas. All external doors and windows should be locked if possible. And evacuation, the orderly removal of staff and members of the public to a safe place, away from the immediate vicinity of the building. Evacuation will normally happen in situations such as fire. An early assessment of the situation is vital. If a terrorist attack begins outside, a quick lockdown procedure could protect everybody inside the site or venue. If a lockdown is slow, incomplete, or causes a state of confusion, the threat could be moved inside, putting people inside at great risk. Here's some of your pros and cons. With evacuation, your pros are lock staff and members of public away from the perpetrator, providing a physical barrier. And the cons are a potential lack of exits, limits the ability to run should the perpetrator gain access or the attack zone spreads. And your evacuation pros allows staff and members of public to get as far away as possible from the scene of the incident. And the cons are some evacuation routes may put staff and members of public at risk of being in the line of fire, or the perpetrator may attempt to pursue along the evacuation route. You need to be aware of suspicious packages and know the procedure to follow if one is identified. You need to know what looks out of place at the venue or site that you're working at, and you can use the HOT protocol to determine whether items are suspicious. So there it is, H for hidden, as someone deliberately tried to conceal it from view. O, obviously suspicious, does its appearance seem odd or out of the ordinary, maybe it's even shown wires, batteries or liquid. And T is for typical, is it typical for the location? For example, a large rucksack would be expected at an outdoor festival, but would be out of place at an indoor concert venue. Like what happened at the MEN Arena, that terrorist who had the big bag on his back. Just try and remember T in the HOT protocol stands for typical. It would be worth trying to remember all points. H for hidden, O for obviously suspicious, and T for typical, because I don't know what question you're going to get in your assessment paper. Okay. Suspicious items should be treated with caution. Don't touch the item. Move yourself and others to a safe distance from the item. Clear 100 meters around the object. For large items or small vehicles, you need a clearance of 200 meters. For large vehicles, you need a clearance of 400 meters. If this question comes up in your test paper, I get a lot of people who colour in 550 meters because it's the furthest away, and I understand why they've chose 550 meters, but that's not what the question normally asks. It normally asks you, what is the minimum distance to clear people for large items or small vehicles? So that's going to be 200 meters, isn't it? For large vehicles, it's going to be a clearance of 400 meters. So try and bear that in mind. It's not asking what's the furthest away to get someone. It's asking what's the minimum distance. So be careful with some of the questions. Keep yourself and others out of line of sight. If you can't see the item, you're better protected from it. I don't agree with that. If it's under the table in a bag, that's not going to protect you, is it? So it's not always the case. Think about what you can hide behind. Find something substantial and keep away from glass, such as windows and skylights. Inform the relevant people as well as the police. Don't use communication devices within 15 meters of the item. Remember, some explosives can be triggered by the signal from your radio or mobile phone. It's not like what we see in Hollywood movies, is it? Like Die Hard or Speed, where he's on the bus and he gets straight on his phone. It's not very realistic. Okay. Make a little note of this somewhere as well. Remember the 4 C's: confirm, clear, communicate, control. It's very likely this will come up in your test paper and it'll ask you what are the 4 C's, and they've got to be in that specific order: confirm, clear, communicate, control. So you need to make a note of that, please. So you're going to confirm if the package is suspicious, clear the area as best you can, communicate to your team and the police, and control others from getting into that area. Suspicious activity is any observed behaviour that could indicate terrorism or terrorism-related crime. Security operatives need to be familiar with the different methods of observing suspicious activity, including people, places, vehicles, and locations. Hostile reconnaissance is the term used to describe how terrorists gain information on potential targets. They will often visit potential targets a number of times prior to an attack. They'll try to find out as much as they can about the location itself and try to discover the best time and method of attack. You need to be vigilant at all times to try and recognize suspicious behavior that may indicate a terrorist interest in your site. Suspicious behavior may include a particular interest in the outside of your site, an interest in the CCTV systems, taking pictures of the site overtly or covertly, making notes or drawing diagrams of your site, taking an interest in the timings of activities, so vehicles coming and going, people coming and going. There might be false alarm activations to test the response time. So is someone breaking your fire alarm, break glass, test on how long it takes for people to come out? Be mindful of these things and aware of these types of suspicions. Damage to the perimeter security, so is that your fencing, your gated area? Is it being damaged? Are they attempting to disguise their identity wearing hats and hoods, trying to hide the face? Are they trespassing or loitering with no good reason? And what we always say, and I mentioned previously, are they asking unusual or specific questions about your site or your security arrangements? Are you on your own all night? Do you get your head down at a certain time? Do you have a little kip? How many cameras are there? Are you watching them all night? These are questions that should be red flags for you, and you should never give answers to these types of questions, okay? Are they nervous or reluctant to be noticed or seen? Are they using forged or fake ID? Or are they parking the vehicle in a strange manner? Don't be afraid to take action. Have the confidence to act. Dial 999 if it's a life-threatening emergency and provide the operator with the following information: your place of work and specific building, the location of the suspicious package inside the building, and whether all customers and employees have been evacuated from the building. When we look back at 2017 and think about the MEN arena, those guards, door staff, stewards could have saved lives if they acted. A lot of them said they were suspicious, but they didn't want to get called racist. You're not going to get called racist if you don't use racist words, okay? You haven't picked on someone as being suspicious based on the colour of their skin or whether they might be wearing some religious items. That's not what raises your suspicion. It's their behaviour that raises your suspicion. So don't ever worry and think you might be called a racist, okay? What's most important is that if your suspicion's raised, you act on that. Don't think, oh, well, what if I'm wrong, and then you don't raise the alarm, and then people end up dead because you thought you might be wrong. It's better to be wrong and raise the alarm than not act at all, and then innocent people end up dying. Okay. Okay, non-urgent information about terrorism should be passed to the anti-terrorist hotline on 0800 789 321. This line is covered at all times by specialist counter-terrorism police officers, and urgent information should be passed on using 999, or you can use the report campaign, which is act.campaign.gov.uk, or non-emergency calls to 101. See it, say it, sorted. The British Transport Police's nationwide campaign designed to encourage train passengers and people visiting train stations to report any unusual items or activity. Passengers and visitors can report any issues by texting 61016 or by calling 0800 405 040. If you get a question on CSA, it's sorted on your assessment paper. If you're doing a full qualification, it may ask you, where is this slogan seen? Is it in cars? Is it on trains? Is it on aeroplanes? Is it on buses? Okay, as we can see there, we know the British Transport Police deal with trains, so it's going to be on trains. See, check and notify, a current awareness strategy that aims to help businesses and organisations maximise safety and security using their existing resources. So that's your action counters terrorism online training that you need to do. If you do the full qualification with us, we can send you the link for that, so you can do it online, both modules. They're a bit like a driving theory test where you're clicking on all the potential risks or hazards and answering some questions at the end. Okay, whoever your training provider is to do the full qualification, they will be issuing you with the link for that. Okay, so there's some of your counter-terrorism experts and their websites if you need more information. And if you get a question that asks you, what does ACT stand for? It's Action Counters Terrorism. So that'll be your answer in your multiple choice test. Okay, so what are the 5 different threat levels that we mentioned at the start? Hopefully you've made notes so you can refer to. If not, have a look back. What are the most common terror attack methods? We went through a list of them. Please make a note of them, ready for your test at the end. And identify behaviours that could indicate suspicious activity. Okay, it says explain how you would respond to the activity you've identified, but it doesn't really give you the answer for that. What's most obviously, you'd phone the police or communicate with your managers and supervisors, but most importantly is that you identify behaviours that could indicate suspicious activity when it comes to terrorism. Okay, and as I asked you before, please make a note of the 4 C's previously, because they are likely to come up in your test.